Hi guys, I'm Dani. In this video, I'll be helping you understand what shutter speed, aperture, and ISO are, how they affect your camera's exposure, and the artifacts that they each come with. First, let's talk about shutter speed. So shutter speed is basically how long the sensor of your camera is exposed to light per second. So you see measurements like 1/30th, 1/60th, 1/25th, and so on. The lower the shutter speed, the brighter the image. The higher the shutter speed, the darker the image. But that's not all. Aside exposure, shutter speed also affects motion blur. So the lower the shutter speed, the brighter the image, but the more the motion blur. The higher the shutter speed, the darker the image, and the less the motion blur. As a guide for normal shooting conditions, you can choose to follow the 180-degree shutter rule, which tells you to set your shutter speed at twice whatever your frame rate is. Next, we have the aperture. So aperture controls how much light is hitting the sensor of your camera. Now note that while shutter speed controls how long light is hitting the sensor of your camera per second, aperture controls how much light is hitting the sensor. Aperture is usually measured in f-stops such as 1.4, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, etc. Now the artifact for aperture is depth of field, which in simple terms is how much of your image is in focus at each point in time. So a deep depth of field has your entire image in focus, while a shallow depth of field will probably have your entire background out of focus and just a part of your image in focus. So if the f-stop number is low, you're going to be letting in a lot of light, but you're also going to be creating a very shallow depth of field, which means that less will be in focus. If the f-stop number is high, the image will be darker, but it will have a deeper depth of field, and so more will be in focus. Finally, the ISO. The ISO is basically a measurement on your camera which controls how sensitive the sensor is to light. So you have measurements like 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, and so on. The lower the number, the darker the image. The higher the number, the brighter the image. So if you're shooting outdoors, you need low numbers like 100 or 200 because the light from the sun is bright enough to light up your image. But you need to set your ISO to higher numbers if you are going to be shooting in a dimly lit environment. The artifact for ISO is grain, which is how noisy your footage is. High ISO numbers can give a brighter image, but will come with a lot of grain, while a lower ISO number would give a darker image but will come with less or no grain at all. So it's always a better option to introduce artificial lighting to brighten up your image than setting the ISO very high. In a case where you're shooting outdoors, you set your aperture to give you a very shallow depth of field, and so as a result of that, you've had to set your ISO to a very low number. But your image is still too bright. You can use what we call the ND filters or the neutral density filters, which basically act as sunglasses for your lens. In another case where you're shooting indoors and you set your aperture and shutter speed at where you want them, but your image is too dark, and you know that if you set your ISO very high, you have all that grain that you don't want. You just have to use more artificial lighting to brighten up your image. I know it's a lot of information, but if you study it well with a lot of practice, you'll definitely get the hang of it. That'll be all for today, guys. Please don't forget to follow me on all my social media platforms and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Feel free to share this video with all your friends. Till next time, thank you for watching.